Quick demo of this video tutorial. In this video and next video, we will implement mean stack user authentication in Node.js and Angular 6. In this part, we will implement the backend Node.js API with Passport.js and JSON Web Token. As you know, there are a lot of things to learn from this topic, so please watch till the end of this video tutorial. What's up YouTube? Welcome to .NET Mob. In this section, we are going to discuss on how to implement JWT user authentication in a mean stack application. In previous tutorials, we have discussed how to do mean stack CRUD operation and user registration in a mean stack application. And this section is a continuation to the previous one where we have covered user registration in mean stack. If you have not seen that video, you can find their links in video description. So here we have the same previous user registration mean stack project. In this part, we will implement mean stack user authentication in Node.js API backend with NPM packages, JSON Web Token and Passport. In the next part, we will complete this discussion by adding a beautiful client-side application with login and logout interface with Angular 6. Before getting into the application development, we want to discuss theory of JSON Web Token in brief. I will try my best in order to make the concept more easier. If you know the concept, you can skip this discussion and continue with the development stage. JSON Web Token, which is abbreviated as JWT. Here we have the official website jwt.io. From their documentation, you can see this definition. JSON Web Token JWT is an open standard that defines a compact and self-contained way of securely transmitting information between parties as a JSON object. This information can be verified and trusted because it is digitally signed. As always, definitions are in formal language and to the point. So it is not easy to understand the concept at first place. Now let's check one by one. So first of all, we can start with a simple point. It is a JSON object. For the time being, you can consider this JWT as a string. It is generated as a result of encryption and encoding of user details. This string will be sent in the form of JSON object. That means it will be lightweight and very easy to use considering XML format. Before explaining rest of the points from the definition, I want to show you the flowchart or mechanism of JWT system. When I say JWT token, you can imagine or consider it as a string like this. Here we have the practical JWT token. Now let's check how JWT authentication works. In the left side, we have the browser or client-side app in Angular 6. On the other end, we have the server-side or Node.js API. Together with MongoDB and Express as a whole, we can say it is a mean stack application. As part of user authentication, we will make a post request from client-side containing user credentials like username or password. In our case, instead of username, we have email. In server-side, API will verify the user credential. If there is a user with given credential, JWT Auth system will return a JSON Web Token back to the client side or web browser. We will save the token in browser local storage because we need the token in order to access private routes from the server. For example, GET request in order to retrieve data of user or chat text. For that, here we have the workflow. Along with such requests, we have to send JSON Web Token. Upon receiving the request at server side, API will verify the authenticity and integrity of token. If it goes well, then it will allow the request in order to consume the private route. Otherwise, it won't. Verification will fail if token is expired or someone is manipulated the token. Now let's check how it happens. For that, we have to understand the structure of JSON Web Token. Before that, I want to make one point. Here you can see the definition. JWT is an open standard. That means this JSON Web Token or JWT is a standard which only states how to generate them and how to use them. In order to implement them in development, we have to depend on one of the package depending upon our development environment. So here you can see .NET, we have these much packages here, and for Python here it is And for Node.js applications, here we have the package JSON Web Token. JSON Web Token without space is an NPM package which helps to implement JWT authentication in Node.js applications. JSON Web Token with space is an open standard, without space is an NPM package. So keep in mind that with and without space things are different. Now let's discuss structure of JWT. From this practical example itself, you can see that it has three parts. First part is called header section, then we have the payload, and finally the most important, signature. In order to form the token, all of these sections are combined with one dot in between them. Now let's discuss what information they actually stores inside them. So here we have the JSON Web Token structure. It contains header, payload and signature. In order to form them, we have concatenated in order header, payload and signature. In between them we have one dot. It mainly contains two information, type and algorithm. Here we have the type, which is equal to JWT, which tells the outside world this is a JSON Web Token. Along with that, we have ALG or algorithm. Inside this JWT, as a last section, we have signature, which is created as a result of encryption. The algorithm used for the encryption of signature is stored inside this ALG attribute here. In most of the case, algorithm used for encryption will be SHA-256 or RSA algorithm. After header, we have the payload. It is actually a collection of claims. Claims are the information about the logged in user or token itself. As per the documentation, here we have three types of claims: registered, public and private claims. For the simplicity of explanation, we have two types of claims. One is claims which are created by the developer and other claims which are not created by the developer. Basically, inside this payload, we are going to store information about the user. So we developers can store information about the user like user ID, email, role, etc. On the other hand, we have claims which are not created by developer. For example, here you can see some claims which are either created by the package which implement JWT or claims which are defined by the open standard JWT. Okay. For example, here we have EXP. Inside that, we will have the token expiration time. Apart from that, you can see here IAT, which means issued at. It stores token generation time. Now back to the practical example here. Here we have the header information and here we have the payload. Inside this token, we will display this header and payload as a result of base 64 URL encode. These two informations are encoded here. Here we have the encoded header part, then a dot, then we have the encoded payload. By encoding, we have two benefits. First of all, it will reduce the size of the string here, and apart from that, it will make this token URL safe. That means, as a result of encoding, it will remove the special characters from this JSON Web Token, so that we can send this JWT as a part of query string in our URL. If there is any special characters like question mark and equal to symbol, then there will be some problem with query string. Okay. And finally, we have the most important, signature. It is created as a result of the encryption here. First of all, it will encode header part and payload, and they are combined with a dot in between them. That string will exactly look like this, and we will encrypt that string using this SHA-256 algorithm or algorithm which is specified in the header part here. For that encryption, we will use a secret code. That means we will encrypt this string using a secret. So inside this signature, we don't have any new information. Instead, we have encrypted this much with a secret code. As we have discussed, we developers stores user information inside payload here. Only store required information inside the payload. Otherwise, requests attached with JWT will consume more bandwidth. Since these two parts, header and payload, are encoded, they can also be decoded easily. So information stored inside the payload are not secured. Then what is the benefit of using JWT? Answer will be authenticity and integrity of token. So let's discuss them in detail. After a successful authentication, we will save this JWT inside the web browser local storage. So it is available for the user without any cost. Suppose inside this payload we store role information. Currently, role is accountant. Obviously, accountant role will have lesser privilege in our application. In order to get more privilege, we change accountant to role admin. If you want to change the role, you will decode this payload here and then change role from accountant to admin role. Then you will decode it back and replace here inside the JWT token. After that, if you send this manipulated token to the server, then we have a process called JWT verification. Inside this signature, we have already encrypted the original header and payload. Upon verification, this signature will be decrypted to the original, and then the original payload and manipulated payload will be compared. If there is any mismatch, this verification will fail, then user can't access the private route. So this is how it maintains the integrity of JSON Web Token. For authenticity, we have already used a secret code for encryption, so it can easily identify whether this token is originally generated from this server or not. So keep in mind that this secret should be kept as a secret in our Node.js application. So that's it. Here we have completed with JWT theory part. I hope we have covered everything related to JWT. Let me know your feedback about my theory part in comment section below. Now let's check how this JWT is generated and used in practical applications. So back to VS Code editor. Now let's set up authentication inside this Node.js application. For that, first of all, we have to install few more packages in addition to previous installed packages. For that, open integrated terminal from the IDE, then navigate inside the server folder, then use this npm command, npm I for install, then -- save. First of all, we need JSON Web Token. After that, passport, then passport-local, and finally we have Nodejs. Hit enter. All of these 4 packages are installed successfully. So first of all, we will start with npm package passport or passport.js. It will act as an authentication middleware in Node.js application. It has various strategies for authentication. For example, local strategy. That means authentication using username and password. Other than that, it has strategies which uses social accounts like Facebook, Twitter, Gmail, GitHub, etc. Here in this Node.js application, we will implement authentication using local strategy. So that is why we have installed this package passport-local. So first of all, let's look how we can configure Passport for authentication using local strategy. For that, inside this config folder, I'm going to add one additional file, passport config.js. So first of all, let's add the request statement for packages. So first of all, we have the constant passport for passport package. Then we have the constant local strategy. Inside that we have stored strategy class from passport local. After that we have the Mongo's constant. Inside this config file we have to interact with MongoDB. For that we can do this. We have the user variable. Inside that we have stored the user schema. Now in order to configure authentication, we will call the function use from passport package. Inside the function we will pass an object of this local strategy class. So here it is. Inside this local strategy constructor, first of all we will pass an option, username field is equal to email. By default, user credential for local strategy are username and password. If there is any change, we can specify with this option here. Instead of username we have email, so that is why we have specified username field is equal to email. As a second parameter we have an arrow function like this. It has parameters username, password, and done. When we call for authentication from Passport, this arrow function will be called. Inside this function, we have to verify whether the credentials, email and password is valid or not. So let's look how we can do that. First of all, we will check whether we have a user with given email address. As a first parameter here we have username, but in our application it will be an email address. In previous tutorial we have inserted user records in our MongoDB. So we can just do this. We will call this find1 function from Mongo's model. As a parameter for this function we can pass the condition here. So here it is, email is equal to username. Actually in this application it will be an email address. After this Mongoose query, this callback function will be called. It has two parameters, error and user record. If there is any error, we can do this. We will return this error by calling this done function and we will pass the error. So when we call the authenticate function from Passport, this error object will be returned as a response. If there is no error, then we will check for unknown users. That means user record is not found with given email address. In that case, we can use this else if condition here. We will return this done function by passing these parameters null, false, and here we have the message email is not registered. If there is a user with given email address, then we will compare the password. So inside this else if block, we will call this verify password function from user schema by passing the plain password. If given plain password does not match with original password, then we will return this done function with these parameters null, false, and here we have the message wrong password. And finally, if it is not a wrong password, we have only one case. That means we have a success authentication. Given username and password are valid. So in that case, we will return this done function with these parameters null, and here we have the user record. Now we have to define this verify password function inside the user schema here. Now let me add a new group for methods here. So if you check this function call here, we have used an instance of user schema. So here we need to define an instance method. In order to add instance method for user schema, we can use this property user schema.methods. Inside that we need a function verify password, and here is the function body. We have a single parameter password. So this will be the plain password. Now we have to compare this password with original password. So here we have the bcrypt package object. Then we will call this comparing function. As a first parameter, here we have the plain password, and here we have the encrypted password. We have already stored encrypted password into this property by calling this find1 function. If there is a user password will be stored inside this password property. So here we will compare the plain password and encrypted password using this function compare sync. If they match each other, it will return true, otherwise it returns false. Now back to the config file. Here inside this file we have successfully configured Passport for local authentication. Now we have to mention that we will be using Passport for authentication inside this Node.js application. That we can do inside this app.js file. First of all, we will add the request statement for the config file that we have just created, passport config from config file. Then only it will execute this passport config file. Now here also we need a request statement for passport. So here it is. Now in order to tell this Node.js application we are going to use passport for authentication, we need to call this use function from app variable. Inside the function we will call this initialize function from passport. Now let's add a post route function to send credentials, email and password for authentication. For that, open user controller, module.exports, and here we have the function authenticate, and here we have the arrow function with three parameters request, response and next. Inside the function we are going to call authenticate function from passport. So here it is. So here we have called the function authenticate from passport. As a first parameter to this function, we have to mention the strategy. For now, we have the local strategy, and as a second parameter, we can pass this function error, user, and info. All of these parameters values are passed from this passport config file. Inside this else if blocks, you can see we have returned this done function. All of these values will be received inside this callback function here. At most we have 3 parameters for this done function here. For this error we have only 1 parameter, and for this one we have 2 parameters, and rest of the case we have 3 parameters for done function. So all of those values will be received inside these 3 parameters here. Now when we call this authenticate function from Passport, it actually executes this arrow function inside this configuration file passport.config.js. Inside that we have already defined criteria for authenticating a user based on his email and password. Along with this authenticate function call from Passport, here we have the additional bracket pair for request and response. Then only we can access request and response object inside this callback function. So when we call this Passport authenticate function, first of all it will execute this function from this configuration here. Inside this function we have returned done function from various else block with different parameters. So those parameters will be received through this arrow function here. So inside this callback arrow function we will do the rest. So first of all we will check whether we have any error or not. If there is any error, we will return the response with status 400, and here we have the JSON object with the error that we have already passed from this done function here. Now let's add an else if block for success authentication. If we have a value inside this user, we can say that user is authenticated. If you check the configuration here, we have only passed value for second parameter when authentication succeeded. When we have a successful authentication, we will return the response with status code 200, and we have to return the token, JWT token. For that, here we have called the JSON function. Inside that we have a JSON object with property token. Now we have to generate a JWT token that we can return from this function generate JWT from this user schema function. We have not yet created this function. We will do that in a bit. Now we have the final else block. Inside that we will handle unknown user case and wrong password. So here is the else block, and we will return the response with status code 404, and here we have the JSON response. Inside that we will send the info, that means this third parameter here, this message will be passed through the response. Now we have to define this function generate JWT inside the user schema. For that, open user model. First of all, we have to add the request statement for JWT package with this constant JWT. Now let's add an instance function. For that, we can use this property here, user schema.methods, and here we have the function name generate JWT. Here we have the function body. Inside that, we have to return a new JWT token. For that, we can call this sign function from JWT. As a first parameter, we have to pass information for payload. That means second part of JWT. Inside this, we can pass informations like ID, email address, full name, then role. For now, we only pass the user ID. So here it is, underscore ID is equal to this dot underscore ID. If you check the practical example from documentation, here we have the payload and here we have the header. We don't set values for header properties. It will be done by the package itself. We only need to pass this payload. Along with that, we have to send this secret code for encryption. So that we have to pass here. For that, we can do this. In order to retrieve value for this property, as per our project configuration, first of all we have to save that value inside this file here, config.json. So here we have the property JWT underscore secret, and here we have the secret code. For the security of JSON Web Token, you must keep this as a secret code. For the development and production, I will use the same secret code. So here we have created the functions generate JWT and router function authenticate. Now let's add a route for this authenticate post function. For that, open index.router.js file. So here we have a post route with this URI /authenticate. We will call this authenticate function from user controller here. Now let's check how this JWT authentication works from Postman application. Before that, you have to add this request statement for Passport in user controller because we already missed that part. Now let's test this application. Before that, make sure both Node.js API and MongoDB are in running status. So here we are inside the Postman application. Here we are going to make a post request with the exact route that we have just created. And here we have the body part. I have already created a user with this exact email and password. First of all, I will make the request with wrong credentials. I want to add few more characters here. Then click on send here. Here we can see the status code 404 not found. And here we have the JSON object with message email is not registered. Now let me try with a wrong password here. Click on send. So here we have the response 404 not found, and here we have the message as wrong password. Now let's try with correct email and password. Click on send. So here we have the response status code 200, and here we have the response object with token property. It contains the JSON Web Token. Okay. Now if you want to understand this token in great detail, back to the browser, then open a new tab here. Then right click inspect, then go to the tab console. Then you can call this function window.atob. Actually this is a function which is used to decode things that we have encoded. So inside this token we have these two parts. First, header and payload are encoded. Now let's try to decode the header part first. Let me copy this. Then back to the browser here, then paste that inside this function, then hit enter. So here we have the header path, here we have the algorithm, and here we have the type of token which is JWT. Now let's try the same with payload. Let me copy this second part from here and pasting here, hit enter. So here we have the payload. As we have already discussed, first two parts header and payload are encoded, so they can be easily decoded also. So it is not recommended to store secure informations like password inside payload. So inside this payload we have the underscore ID, which is the user record ID in MongoDB, and here we have the IAT. This is a reserved claim which indicates issued at time. So it will be a number which contains date time value. Now let's try to make this same JWT using the official website jwt.io. For that, we can just copy this original object from here. Then we can paste that here. Now we have the payload. Finally, we have to paste our secret code that we have stored inside the config.json file. So here we have the same JSON Web Token that we have received through this response here. Now regarding this Node.js JWT authentication, we have to discuss two more points. First, we have to set expiration time for JWT token. Second, we have to prevent private routes using JWT token verification. First of all, we will set JWT expiration time. For that, first of all, we will add the expiration time in config.json file here. JWT_exp, we will save the same inside the production environment also. Now back to user model file where we have a function generate JWT where we have to define the expiration time. Actually, in order to set expiration time, we have the reserved claim exp where we have to provide the exact timestamp for expiration. Okay, but for better readability, package has given an option so that we can set the expiration time using a string which describes a time span. For that, we can add an extra option here with property expires in, and here we have the time which we have already saved inside this JSON file here, which we can store like 2h for 2 hours, 2d for 2 days, 2m for 2 minutes. So it is that simple. We have set expiration time for JWT here. Now I want to add one more function, user profile, in which we have to display details of currently authenticated user like email, first name, last name, etc. And then we will make the route private using JWT. For that, you can open user controller. So inside this controller, we will define the function user profile with another function like this. So here we have the usual parameters request, response, and next. Now before defining this function, I want to add one route for this route function. For that, you can open this routes file here, index.router.js. We have the router.get function. Inside that, we have the URI/user profile, and here we have the function that we need to call. Now let's make this route as private using JWT. In order to access private route from this Node.js application, client-side application must attach JWT token in the request header. Now in order to make this route as private, we need to pass one additional function here so that this function will be called before this function. Inside this function, we have to verify the JWT token which is currently attached to this request. In order to define a function for JWT verification, I'm going to add an additional file inside this config folder here. I will name this file as JWT helper.js. First of all, I will add the request statement for JWT. After that, we can define a function for JWT verification. So here it is. Here we have the function verify JWT token, and here we have the function body. It is exactly similar to a router function with these common parameters request, response, and next. Inside the function, first of all, we will define a local variable token. Inside that, we will store the token sent from the client-side application. Now in order to make a GET request to consume the private route from the client-side application, we have to send the JWT in the request header like this. We have the property or attribute authorization which is set as bearer. Then we have a space here. After that, we can provide the JWT. So inside this application, in order to retrieve the token, first of all, we have this if statement. Inside that, we will check whether we have a property in our request header. If we have one, then we can go ahead with JWT verification. So first of all, we will extract the token from the request header like this. Inside this request header, we have the authorization, and we have to split that string with a space, and it will return an array. So here we have the second item. That means when we split this using a space, it will return an array containing two elements. First one will be bearer, and then we have the JWT token. After that, we will check whether we have any token stored inside this variable or not. If there is no token, we will send this response with status code 403, and here we have to send a proper error object like this. Inside that, we have first property auth, which is set as false. That means authentication is failed, and here we have the message no token provided. If there is a token, we can deal with that inside this else block here, and we will call the verify function from JWT. Inside that, first of all, we will provide the token that we have just extracted. As a second parameter, we have to provide the JWT secret that we have already saved inside this config.json file here. And here we have the callback function. It has two parameters. For errors, we have this parameter, and here we have the second parameter decoded. Inside that, we will have the decoded informations from payload. That means when we authenticate a user, we have saved some informations in payload like user record ID. So when we decode that during verification, those IDs can be retrieved from this decoded object. So first of all, we will check whether we have any error during this JWT verification. If there is any error, we will return the response with status code 500, and here we have to send an error object. Auth is equal to false, and here we have the message token authentication failed. If there is no error, inside this else block, we can store recorded information from JWT in our request object so that we can receive those values in our actual request function. Inside this, we have the user ID from MongoDB record that we have saved inside this request object with this property underscore ID. Since we have a success JWT token verification, we can allow the original request function to handle this request. For that, we can call this next function here. Now we have to provide this function verify JWT token in this router as a second function here, so that this route will be a private route. After that, in order to access this private route, client-side request must be attached with JWT token in the request header. And now we have to pass this function here, so I will add the request statement here. After that, we can do this JWT helper dot verify JWT token function can be passed here. Now let's complete this user profile function inside the user controller so that it can return currently logged in user details back to the client-side application. Now in order to retrieve details of new user from Mongoose, we can do this. We will call this Mongoose function find one using user schema. Inside that, first of all, we have to provide the condition. That means underscore ID is equal to the user record ID, which we have already decoded and stored inside this underscore ID property from our JWT verification function here. Now we have to add one callback function here with two parameters, error and user record. First of all, we will check whether we have any user or not. If there is no user, we will return the response with status code 404, and here we have the JSON object to return. Inside that, we have the status false, and here we have the message user record not found. If we have a user, we have to return that user record. So here we have the else block. We will return the response with status code 200, and here we have the JSON object. Inside that, we have the status as true. Now we have to send the user record here. User is equal to user. But for this request response, we don't need to send details like password and user record. We just need to send email and full name. That means we have to pick full name and email address from this object. In order to do that, I will use the load dash package. First of all, I will add the request statement for the package load dash, and here we have the constant for this package underscore. Now from this user object, we need to pick two properties, email and full name. For that, we can do this. We have the load dash constant, then just call this function pick from this package. As a first parameter, we have to pass the object. From that, we have to pick some property. As a second parameter, we have an array which contains full name and email address. So this function will pick email and full name from this object, and it will save inside this attribute user here. Now let's test this application in Postman. First of all, I want to authenticate this user. For that, we have to make a post request to this URI API/authenticate, and here we have the original user credentials, email and password. Click on send. So here we have the token, JWT token. Now I want to make the get request to this route here, user profile. For that, we can do this. We have to make a get request. The URI for the request will be like this. Instead of authenticate, we have user profile, and we have to provide this JSON Web Token inside this request header. So here we have the header. Inside that, we have to provide the token inside this authorization key, and here we have bearer, then provide a space, and we have to copy this JWT there. Let me copy this and pasting here. Now click on send. So here we have the request response with status code 200, and here we have the response. Status is equal to true. Here we have the full name Gina Frost, and here we have the email abcd@gmail.com. So this is how to access private route from a Node.js application with JWT token. Now if you try to manipulate this token here, then click on send. So here we have the status code 500, auth is failed, message token authentication failed. Now let me copy this payload part from this JSON Web Token. We have already done this. just call window.atob function. Inside that we can paste the payload. Hit enter. Here you can see an additional claim which is exp. Inside that we have the numeric number which indicates the time span for the expiration time. We have given this expiration time like 2M or 2H or 2D. It will be saved as a time span in this reserved claim exp. Okay. You can download this project source code from the GitHub link given below in video description. In the next part, we will add a beautiful front end with login and logout features in Angular 6. If you found this video helpful, please thumbs up this video, and for more awesome videos like this, please be subscribed to this channel. .NET More. Please like and share this video with your friends and colleagues so that they can benefit from this. Have a nice day. Bye.